11 people were ritually killed and eaten in a cave in Spain 5,700 years ago. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Roman soldiers ran into a tunnel only to be killed with an ancient chemical weapon. And a couple digging under their driveway found a hidden German World War II bunker. These are disturbing discoveries made deep underground. In a cave in northern Spain called El Mirador, archaeologists found the remains of 11 people who were killed and eaten around 5,700 years ago. When they looked closely at the bones, they saw clear blade marks, burn marks, and human bite marks. One of the most shocking finds was a child's leg bone that had been cracked open to get the marrow out. Antonio Rodriguez Hidalgo, one of the scientists who studied the bones, said this sort of thing happened more often than most people think back then, but this wasn't a case of famine. All 11 people died around the same time, and there's no sign that food was scarce. The evidence points to something darker, a kind of war ritual. The people who died probably belonged to an enemy group, and eating them might have been a way to wipe them out completely, both physically and spiritually. The cave sits in an area called Atapuerca, which has a long history of other discoveries like this. In fact, researchers say it's become the capital of people eating each other from back then, because of how many ancient bones with cut marks have been found there, and the oldest cases go back nearly 1,000,000 years. Almost 2,000 years ago, 19 Roman soldiers ran into a cramped underground tunnel outside the Syrian city of Dura Europos, ready to stop a Persian army from digging under the city walls. But instead of the enemy, they were met with a wall of black smoke that turned to acid in their lungs. They choked and died almost instantly. Simon James, a historian who looked at old excavation sketches from the 1930s, said this was a deliberate pile of bodies. The Romans had steered their tunnel to intercept the Persians, but the attackers had set a trap, lighting a fire with sulfur and bitumen that filled the tunnels with toxic fumes. Adrian Mayer, a historian at Stanford, explained that chemical warfare was not unknown back then. Ancient armies were pretty creative. Greeks burned feathers and blew the smoke into tunnels, and Alexander the Great's enemies once heated sand and catapulted it at his troops. So the Persians using smoke as a weapon, totally plausible, Mayer said. When Sean and Carolyn Tullier bought their house in Guernsey back in 2021, they had no idea there was a secret Third Reich bunker sitting 26 feet below their driveway. Guernsey, on the Channel Islands, was occupied by German forces during World War II, and the couple knew the area had military history, but this was something else. It all started when a woman who used to live in the house messaged Sean on Facebook after seeing one of his marketplace listings. She asked if he'd found the rooms below the house yet, and Sean was like, "There are rooms?" And that set off a dig that took weeks. Sean and a friend used an excavator to move over 100 tons of dirt until, as he put it, the ground just gave way and this doorway appeared. Inside, they found what looked like a preserved wartime hideout, a bunch of rooms lined with bottles, rusted tins, and an escape hatch, of course. And on one wall, in faded German letters, were the words Achtung, Fiend hort mit, meaning beware, the enemy is listening. The couple ended up turning the place into a games room. This past July in Lima, Peru, workers were digging trenches to expand an underground gas network when they discovered two pre-Incan tombs, one empty and the other holding a body about 1,000 years old. Along with the skeleton were 4 clay pots and 3 carved pumpkin shells, probably used for storing food or offerings. Archaeologist Jose Aliaga said the designs and colors on the pots, quote, allow us to establish a connection with the pre-Incan Chancay culture, which lived roughly between 1,000 and 1,470 years ago. The person was sitting with their legs pulled up to their chest. Aliaga and his team are carefully cleaning the remains, studying every detail they can. Lima, which is home to 10 million people, sits over hundreds of pre-Inca and Inca sites, so discoveries like this aren't necessarily rare even. There's a sinkhole in southern Mexico that nobody in the nearby villages will go near. They call it Sac Oyum. Back in 2014, archaeologist Bradley Russell and his team decided to dive into it. And what they found was hair-raising. It became immediately obvious why there were so many ominous warnings and legends surrounding this place. There were bones, lots of them. From the very first dive, we had seen skulls, Russell said. Getting down wasn't easy either. They had to rappel 40 feet past huge stalactites and long tree roots. In the first chamber, skulls, ribs, and long bones were scattered across the floor. One skull, probably a woman's, had been flattened on top, a Maya custom. A horseshoe-shaped jaw nearby showed it belonged to a young adult, teeth still perfect. The second chamber was darker and even creepier. Completely underwater and twice the size of the first, it held at least 5 more skulls, along with bones that had tumbled down after a chunk of the floor collapsed. And the way Russell describes exploring this place is terrifying. "This is very technical diving," he said. "You're crawling on your belly with your tanks against the ceiling, and there's no popping to the surface if something goes wrong." Now, why were all these bones down there? Why was this specific sinkhole believed to be such an ominous place for hundreds and hundreds of years? Russell thinks the people down there may have been plague victims, saying you wouldn't want them near the rest of the population, and you wouldn't want to drink the water either. Makes sense.
Every canary brought inside dropped instantly. In 1980, a mining inspection team entered an abandoned silver mine in Idaho after locals complained about a strange smell drifting out of the entrance. As soon as the team carried in their air testing birds, the animals collapsed. They had not flown around or struggled, they simply fell from their perches. When the team tested the air, they found dangerously high levels of hydrogen sulfide. The concentration was so high that even brief exposure could knock someone unconscious. But the strange part was that the mine had not been active for decades, and there were no geological signs the gas should have accumulated in those amounts. Experts eventually concluded that a slow buildup of decaying organic material deep in the lower chambers had created a pocket of gas that rose upward over time. But no one could explain why the levels were so extreme or why they had suddenly begun venting toward the entrance. The mine was sealed permanently, and locals have reported for years that during hot summers, the smell still leaks out.
In 1963, a man in Turkey was doing some routine renovation work in his basement when he grabbed a sledgehammer and started knocking down a wall. The moment the wall crumbled, he saw something that he was never expecting to see. Behind the stone was a pitch-black opening, and when he followed it, he realized he wasn't just in a tunnel, he was in a massive underground tunnel leading to an ancient city called Derinkuyu. And when I say underground city, I really mean it. This was not a small cave or a storage room. It's a whole network of rooms and pathways carved directly into the rock, stretching hundreds of feet below the surface. The scale of the place, it's hard to wrap your head around. It had 18 levels, was built to shelter up to 20,000 people at a time. It had everything a real city needs to function: kitchens, stables for animals, chapels and schools, all connected by these narrow hallways. It even had a genius ventilation system with shafts that channeled fresh air all the way down to the bottom levels. They used giant circular stone doors that could only be locked from the inside to block off intruders. For hundreds of years, the people living on the surface had no idea that this entire city was sitting right below their feet. In 2013, a California couple was taking their dog for a walk on their property when they noticed something strange sticking out of the dirt near an old tree. It was a rusted metal can, mostly buried and covered in grime. At first, they probably thought it was just some old trash that someone had dumped decades ago, but when they pried open the lid, they found gold coins inside. They went back to the same spot with a metal detector and started scanning the area, and before long, they were digging up 7 more cans. Inside those cans were thousands of gold coins dating back to the late 1800s, all in near perfect condition. This is now known as the Saddle Ridge Hoard, and it was estimated to be worth around $10 million. Nobody knows for sure who put the coins there, but historians think a wealthy person didn't trust the banking system and decided to bury their life savings in the dirt. Obviously, it never came back for them. The couple had walked past that specific tree for years without realizing that they were stepping on a literal fortune. In early 2026, construction workers in Hull, England were in the middle of a routine excavation for a new water tank in Queen's Gardens when they hit something incredibly hard. They assumed it was a rock or some old foundation, but then they cleared away the mud and they realized they were staring at a huge cast iron cannon. It was over 8 feet long and weighed more than 2,200 pounds. It had been buried underground for centuries, and historians believe it dates back to the late 1600s. Back in that era, this area of the city was part of a major fortified dockyard. As the city grew and warfare changed, the old fortifications were torn down and the land was leveled to make room for new buildings. Instead of the massive back-breaking job of hauling that heavy cannon away, the construction crews at the time just dumped it in a hole and paved right over it. So it sat there for 300 years while the city transformed around it. When a company started construction on a new hotel in Alexandria, Virginia back in 2015, they were not expecting to find a piece of the high seas in their foundation. While they were digging out the dirt for the basement levels, crew kept hitting large curved pieces of timber. It looked like someone had just dropped a huge wooden frame in the mud. As it turned out, that was sort of the case. It was the remains of a merchant ship from the 1700s. In the 18th century, people didn't have the same environmental laws that we have today, obviously, and when a ship got too old, damaged to sail, it wasn't always scrapped or taken to a shipyard. Often it was just dragged to the shoreline and sunk on purpose. It filled the boat with rocks and dirt to create new solid land, which helped the city expand its waterfront. So over time, the city just grew out over the hulls of these ships. The one they found in Alexandria is remarkably well preserved because it was buried in wet, oxygen-free mud that prevented the wood from rotting. So archaeologists had to move at an incredible pace to dismantle the ship piece by piece, trying to preserve the wood before it just dried out and crumbled. A maintenance crew in Scotland was doing some routine repairs on the old Ruthven Bridge a few years back when they pulled a loose stone out of the foundation. Sitting in a small hollowed out space inside the masonry was a metal box. Turned out it was a time capsule left by the bridge's original builders way back in 1894. Inside the box, they found a local newspaper from the exact day the bridge was finished, a handwritten scroll with the names of every worker who built it, and a bottle of scotch. It was a tradition for builders at the time to leave a little something behind for future generations, a way of saying we were here. While the paper and the scroll were gold for historians, the bottle of whiskey, that was definitely the prize. A literal taste of the 1890s, showing exactly how the drink was made more than 100 years ago. Ireland's peat bogs are usually good at preserving things. The environment is cold, low oxygen, and slow to break things down, which is why people have pulled wooden tools, clothing, and even human bodies out of them in remarkable condition. In 2016, a man cutting turf found a large waxy lump buried underground. It weighed around 22 pounds and turned out to be something called bog butter, which is literally just butter found in bogs. It was roughly 2,000 years old. In ancient Ireland, butter was buried in bogs for different reasons. To store it, to hide it, or possibly as some kind of offering. The reasoning isn't always clear. What is clear, though, is that even after all that time underground, the chemical structure of the fat is still pretty much the same. The smell is apparently a totally different story, though. Not anything you'd want near your food. After World War II, not every tank and armored vehicle got stored in a museum or melted down for scrap. Some of them were just buried. Across parts of the UK, construction workers and farmers have dug up tanks and other military equipment, sometimes only a few feet below the surface. In many cases, they were buried on purpose. It was just the fastest way to clear land after the war ended, and pulling them out wasn't seen as worth the effort. So some vehicles were used in training exercises or testing and got stuck or damaged badly enough that moving them just wasn't practical. The solution: push them into the ground and move on. Stuff grew over the pits over time, and eventually they looked like nothing more than a slightly uneven patch of field. So when this stuff suddenly shows up during construction, it's almost always a surprise. A seemingly completely ordinary piece of land turns out to have a World War II tank sitting right underneath it. At the very northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada, there's a place called Lands O' Meadows. In the 60s, Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad went to investigate some unusual mounds that locals had noticed in the landscape. What they uncovered were the remains of Norse buildings, sod houses, a workshop, signs of metalworking. The site dates to around the year 1000. This was the confirmation that Norse explorers had reached North America about 500 years before Columbus. Everything had been slowly covered by layers of soil and grass over the years, blending into the landscape, well enough that nothing looked out of place from the surface. The site appears to have been used only for a short period of time, which actually helped preserve it. There just wasn't much later building or activity on top of it to disturb what was already there. In 1996, archaeologist Zahi Hawass made a major discovery in Egypt's Bahariya oasis. The site became known as the Valley of the Golden Mummies. The burials date to the Greco-Roman period, around 2,000 years ago. What's been found there so far includes hundreds of mummies, many of them decorated with gold, particularly on their faces. These were not pharaohs or royalty, though. They appear to just be middle or upper class people who had the extra money for more elaborate burials. The tombs are connected through a series of underground chambers and passageways, and they're still digging there to this day. A lot of researchers think there could be way more burials hidden underground. Some estimates get pretty high, but nothing's been fully confirmed yet. Even so, what they've already found makes it one of the biggest mummy discoveries in Egypt's history. In the early 2000s, coal miners working in an open pit mine in Colombia started turning up fossils. Some of the vertebrae they found were bigger than than anything on record. Scientists eventually identified the remains as belonging to a snake called Titanoboa. It lived around 60 million years ago, shortly after the dinosaurs went extinct, and based on the fossils, it was about 13 meters long, or roughly 42 feet. That makes it the largest snake ever discovered. Some say these things could have even reached like 50 feet. Snakes are cold-blooded, which means their body size is directly tied to how warm their environment is. The hotter the climate, the larger they can grow. So safe to say it was pretty hot there back in Titanoboa's day. It lived in a dense, swampy, tropical environment, and over millions of years, the landscape slowly compressed and turned into coal. That's why its fossils ended up buried so deep, only showing up once miners started cutting into those layers. In 2024, a family in Southwick, England had been living in their house for 3 years without having any idea there was a World War II bunker sitting under their garden the whole time. It only came out when they started doing some work in the backyard. Catherine Milburn, one of the homeowners, said they were digging around when they hit something strange under a summer house. She said, "There's about a 3-meter long piece of concrete underneath the summer house in the garden. We noticed steel bars. We thought it was a bit over the top for a summer house. Then we got to a corrugated iron sheet. They kept digging into the night and eventually found steps going down into a water-filled tunnel. Turned out this is a wartime air raid shelter. Historians think that what they found is what's called an Anderson shelter, a specific type of shelter that was buried in people's backyards to protect families from air raids during the war. Very few of these things are still around. Millions were installed before and during the war, but most got filled in or dug up afterward. Finding one intact is genuinely rare. And here's a similar case. Over in Kent, England, a woman named Rebecca Hobson wasn't exactly planning on making a big historical discovery in her own backyard, but it was 2020, this was the lockdown, and she had more time on her hands, and she ended up getting into talking with some neighbors about an old concrete slab sitting in her garden. People in the area had been saying for a while that there might be something underneath it, so she lifted it up. What she found wasn't just some old cellar, it was the entrance to a 160-foot underground bomb shelter built during World War II, also used to shelter people during air raids. Rebecca hasn't gone into a lot of detail about exactly what's inside, but just the fact that something this big had been sitting under a regular backyard for decades without anyone knowing, it says a lot. There's a huge amount of history still buried under totally normal homes and gardens across England, and nobody even knows most of it is there. In 2013, in Midland City, Alabama, police were dealing with a 65-year-old man named Jimmy Lee Dykes. He'd shot a school bus driver, grabbed a young boy off the bus, dragging him down into a bunker he dug under his property. The space was tiny, maybe 6 by 8 feet, reinforced, and he'd rigged it with at least one explosive. Negotiators were trying to communicate with him through a PVC pipe that he'd run into the bunker, basically using it as a kind of line to the outside world without him having to come out. Police figured out he had food, electricity, and a TV down there. He was set up to hold out for a long time if he wanted to. The standoff went on for almost a week. Eventually, tactical teams went in. There was a brief exchange of fire. Dykes was killed, and the boy was thankfully rescued unharmed. Under the grounds of Scarborough Castle in North Yorkshire, England, archaeologists found a Cold War bunker that had been completely lost for decades. The castle sits overlooking the town, and buried underneath was this reinforced concrete shelter built in the 60s. It was meant to protect Royal Observer Corps volunteers in the event of a nuclear attack. Kevin Booth from English Heritage said, "Wherever you lived in Britain, you were probably no more than a few miles from an ROC post, yet few people knew they existed. It seems strange to have a Cold War bunker built inside Scarborough Castle, but in many ways, it is a perfect location." End quote. The dig started on March 7th after survey data suggested something was hidden under the castle. Once they opened it up and sent cameras in, they found cramped bunks, communication equipment, and just enough room for a small group of volunteers to ride out a nuclear blast while tracking what was happening above ground. This is one of around 1,500 bunkers like it across the UK, and most of them have been forgotten. The Royal Observer Corps had over 20,000 volunteers whose whole job was monitoring atomic explosions, and the general public barely knew any of it existed. Booth also pointed out something really cool about the location. That land has been used as a lookout point for thousands of years, going back to the Bronze Age.
One man, a pickaxe, tracks and 40 years of digging created a Mediterranean resort beneath the California desert. Baldassare Farisier was a Sicilian immigrant who moved to Fresno in 1901 to grow citrus. However, he found the Fresno heat unbearable and the soil too hard for traditional farming, so he started digging. Over the next 4 decades, he excavated a massive home and garden complex spanning 10 acres, all underground. It's an architectural masterpiece with skylights that allow fruit trees like lemons and oranges to grow 20 feet below the surface. He built bedrooms, a kitchen, and even a fish pond. He used no blueprints, just his imagination and his hands. The design allows for natural airflow, keeping the gardens 20 degrees cooler than the surface. It's a stunning example of how one man's desire for comfort created a subterranean paradise. In Atlanta, there's a place where the 19th century literally lives underneath the 20th century. Atlanta raised its streets in the 1920s to build viaducts over the congested railroad tracks. This created a city beneath the city where the original ground level storefronts were suddenly in the dark. For years, these spaces were used for storage or forgotten entirely. Until the late 1960s, it was rediscovered and turned into a massive entertainment district called Underground Atlanta. While it has seen its ups and downs as a mall, the historical architecture remains. You can still see the original ironwork and ornate facades of the 1800s businesses that were once the heartbeat of the city. It's a strange, sprawling labyrinth that serves as a bridge between Atlanta's Civil War era past and its modern skyscrapers. 650 feet below the Kansas wheat fields lies a city of salt that is so massive it has its own railroad and a vault containing the world's most famous secrets. Stratica is a massive salt mine that began operations in 1923. Over a century of mining has created hundreds of miles of tunnels. The air there is incredibly dry and the temperature is constant, which makes it one of the most secure storage facilities on the planet. Deep within the mine, a company called Underground Vaults and Storage keeps some of the world's most valuable treasures. We're talking about the original masters of Star Wars, the glass slippers from The Wizard of Oz, and even secret government documents. Because the salt creates a natural envelope, nothing ever rots or decays. There is an entire infrastructure down there, including a tram system and a gallery that shows what life was like for the miners who spent their lives in the white darkness. These caves have seen everything from 19th century mushroom farmers to 1930s gangsters hiding from the FBI. Carved into the soft sandstone of St. Paul, these caves were originally used to grow mushrooms because of the damp, cool environment. But during Prohibition, they took on a much more spirited life. They were converted into an underground nightclub called the Castle Royal. Legend and police records suggest that this was a favorite hangout for notorious gangsters like John Dillinger and Ma Barker. Local stories even claim that 3 gangsters were taken right inside the caves, and their bodies were supposedly buried behind the sandstone walls to avoid police detection. Today, it's one of the few places where you can still visit a real Prohibition-era speakeasy that exists exactly as it did when the jazz was loud and the liquor was illegal. Located inside a 1,000-acre former limestone mine, this is the most secure underground city in the world, and you aren't invited. Iron Mountain is the gold standard of underground storage. This facility is located 220 feet underground and is protected by armed guards and a 12-ton gate. It is not just a storage unit, it's a city with its own fire department, water purification system, and backup generators. What's inside, you ask? The Corbis Photographic Collection, which includes some of the most famous images in human history and the Social Security Administration's records. They even have a massive data center that powers a huge chunk of the internet. It is so deep and so reinforced that it is considered one of the most likely places to survive a global catastrophe. It is the ultimate library of human civilization tucked away in the dark of Pennsylvania. It is wild to think that while we're all worrying about traffic and the weather, that there are people working in salt mines, tourists walking through Victorian basements, and billions of dollars of data sitting in limestone fortresses right beneath our feet. America is a lot deeper than it looks on the surface.
This one's legitimately disturbing. Deep in the forests of Gabon in Central Africa, researchers found this hidden chamber and had to lower themselves nearly 50 feet down through a narrow vertical shaft to get inside. No natural light reaches down there at all, and when they got to the bottom, they found the bones of at least 28 people scattered across the floor, along with hundreds of iron and copper artifacts like jewelry and weapons. Some of the bodies were arranged in specific ways that could mean they were ritually buried. There's no settlement anywhere nearby, no written records that anything existed here. Nobody knows who these people were or why they ended up sealed in an underground chamber. The entrance is a straight vertical drop with no easy way in or out. Archaeologists still don't know how the bodies were lowered down or how many more artifacts might be buried in the sediment. It's Easily one of the creepiest underground discoveries ever made in Africa. Early in 2025, a team from the University of Naples was exploring these karst caves in southern Italy called Partosa Oletta when they found a hidden ritual chamber carved deep into the limestone. This thing dates back to the Hellenistic period, roughly 4th to 1st century BCE, but some of the objects inside are even older, Bronze Age stuff, meaning this site was used for over 1,000 years. Inside this tiny chamber, maybe just a few meters across, they found terracotta figurines, small altars, coins, and vessels for offerings, all carefully arranged. This was an active ritual space. The ceilings are super low, and the tunnels leading to it are narrow, so anyone performing ceremonies would have had to squeeze through and crouch the whole time. Researchers think it was probably a secret space for religious cults to practice their ceremonies. In 2024, archaeologists from Mexico's INAH, that's the National Institute of Anthropology and History, were surveying these desert mountains in Coahuila when they found a vertical shaft only 50 centimeters wide leading down to a hidden cave. They had to squeeze through this tiny opening to reach the chamber below. Inside, they found the remains of 17 people, all carefully wrapped and placed, along with small offerings. Carbon dating shows the burials happened over several hundred years, but the cave was deliberately sealed and hidden far from any settlements. The remoteness, on top of how dang narrow the entry is, would have made it nearly impossible for anyone to find unless they knew exactly where to look. INAH researchers called it a, quote, hidden vertical tomb. Bones were stacked in certain spots, artifacts were placed nearby, clear signs these were intentional burials with some sort of meaning behind them. In 2023, construction workers in Wales were digging to install a power line pole when the ground gave way, and what was underneath was a system of tunnels. These passages are about 4 feet tall, running alongside a small brook, all carved by hand. Archaeologists say it's medieval, probably several hundred years old, but there's zero record of it anywhere. Nobody knows who built it or why. Some researchers think it could have been a secret escape or smuggling route. Others say maybe villagers used it to hide valuables during raids. It's tight and dark down there, very claustrophobic. You'd have to be crouched the whole time, and if you're using a flashlight, the beam just disappears into the darkness ahead of you. And these tunnels were completely hidden until recently. It makes you wonder, what if there are more tunnels we haven't found yet? What else could be hidden down there? On the Isle of Lewis in Scotland, archaeologists discovered this stone underground chamber dating to the late Iron Age, somewhere between 500 and 100 BCE. Passage is about 22 feet long and 4 feet wide. And you get to it by going down these carefully cut stone steps that lead into this cool, dark chamber below. The ceiling dips in spots, so you're crouching or even crawling in some areas, and the walls are made of overlapping sandstone blocks that press in just enough to make the air feel heavy and tight. Nobody really knows exactly why this place was built. Some think it was a place to hide people or stash food and supplies, but there's no way to be sure. In 2023, archaeologists from the National Institute of Anthropology and History were working near the ancient city of Tulum in Mexico when they found 2 Maya burial chambers completely hidden by this massive boulder. To get inside, they had to squeeze through a narrow gap, but once inside, they came across the remains of 8 people carefully laid out, and bones of various animals like dogs, turtles, bats, and tiger sharks are buried alongside them. The chambers are tiny, 2 small rooms no more than about 3 meters long by 2 meters wide, with super low ceilings in places. You'd have to crawl or lie flat to move around here. So over the past few years, archaeologists working at Saqqara, right near the temple of Bastet, the cat goddess, have been uncovering these deep vertical shafts that lead to sealed tombs nobody had touched in over 2,000 years. They started finding them in 2021, but every time they went back, they'd hit new layers. Some of these shafts go down more than 30 feet, packed with mummies and sealed wooden coffins, artifacts stacked on top of each other. They just kept burying generation after generation underground until the whole area became this maze of tombs within tombs. The deeper chambers are where things get really creepy. Some were completely sealed with big stone slabs, and when they finally cracked them open, they found dozens of perfectly preserved mummies, painted sarcophagi, piles of statues, and scrolls that still had readable hieroglyphs. One chamber had 150 bronze statues of Egyptian gods crammed inside, including Anubis and Osiris.
Imagine walking into a modern gift shop in Seattle only to realize that the basement is actually the original front door of a building from the 1800s. In 1889, the Great Seattle Fire leveled 31 blocks of the city. When it came time to rebuild, the city planners faced a massive problem. The original city was built on soggy tidelands, meaning it flooded constantly with, believe it or not, sewage. Their solution was pretty radical. They built massive retaining walls and raised the street level by as much as 22 feet. For a while, citizens had to use ladders to get from the new street down to the old storefronts. Eventually, they paved over the gaps, creating a ceiling for the old city. Walking through here today, you can see the original brickwork, Victorian-era glass skylights embedded in the modern sidewalks above, and even old bathtubs and furniture left behind when the area was condemned in 1907 due to the bubonic plague fears. It sat empty for decades until a local historian began tours in the 1960s. It's a literal time capsule of a frontier town frozen in mud and brick. Beneath the trendy bars of Portland lies a dark labyrinth where, for nearly 100 years, a man could go in for a drink and wake up miles out at sea as a slave. These tunnels, officially known as the Old Town Chinatown Tunnels, connected the basements of many hotels and taverns to the Willamette River. While they were built for moving goods from ships to avoid street traffic, they became the epicenter of Shanghaiing. This was the practice of kidnapping men to serve as sailors. Unsuspecting victims would be dropped through deadfalls, trapdoors built directly into the floor of saloons. Once they fell through, they were held in cramped wooden cells in the tunnels, drugged or beaten, and then moved through the dark passages directly onto waiting ships. These men wouldn't see the sun again until they were far out in the Pacific Ocean. Today, you can see the remnants of the holding cells and the trapdoor mechanisms that facilitated this terrifying underground trade. For over 30 years, one of the most famous luxury resorts in America was hiding a 112,000 square foot secret designed to save the US government from the end of the world. During the height of the Cold War, the Eisenhower administration made a secret deal with the Greenbrier Resort. Under the guise of building a new wing for the hotel, they excavated a massive bunker 720 feet into the hillside. Codenamed Project Greek Island, it was designed to house the entire US Congress in the event of a nuclear strike. It featured a giant reinforced door that could withstand a blast, a self-contained power plant, a medical clinic with an operating room, and enough bunk beds for 1,100 people. It even had a television studio to broadcast messages to any survivors. The craziest part? The hotel staff had no idea. The people maintaining the bunker posed as TV technicians for a fake company, and the secret was only revealed in 1992 by a Washington Post expose leading to the facility's decommissioning. You might think the only thing under Manhattan is the subway, but beneath a quiet cathedral in Little Italy, the elite of Old New York are still waiting in the dark. Located beneath the Basilica of St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, these are the only catacombs in Manhattan. Unlike the mass graves of Paris, these are walled catacombs featuring private family vaults. This is where the real-life gangs of New York era figures, wealthy bankers, and Civil War generals are interred. The catacombs are usually off limits to the public, lit only by candlelight during special tours. It's a silent, eerie world of brick and marble that feels thousands of miles away from the honking taxis just a few feet above you. The vaults belong to families like the Delmonicos and the Durham family who helped build the city into the powerhouse that it is today. What if your morning commute involved driving your car into a literal mountain to get to your office? Welcome to Subtropolis, the world's largest underground business complex. Located 150 feet below the surface of Kansas City, this city was created by mining a 270 million year old limestone deposit. It is massive, spanning over 55 million square feet, with miles of paved roads wide enough for semi-trucks to pass by each other. Because the temperature is a constant natural 65 to 70 degrees, it is the perfect place for companies to store things. The US Postal Service stores millions of stamps here, and the National Archives keeps original film reels of Hollywood classics like The Wizard of Oz. Over 1,600 people go to work here every day in an environment that is completely immune to the Midwestern tornadoes and blizzards happening on the surface.
There's a whole abandoned underground city beneath Seattle, and no, I'm not just talking about a system of tunnels. This is an actual city that people used to live and work in. Back in 1889, the Great Seattle Fire tore through downtown, leveling almost everything in its path. The city decided to rebuild, but instead of just throwing up new buildings, they did something kind of different. They raised the entire street level. They dumped soil and debris between buildings, creating this elevated ground floor. The problem was that some business owners had already started rebuilding before the city's plans were finalized, so their brand new ground floors ended up underground. So instead of tearing them down, the old sidewalks and storefronts got sealed off, leaving behind this maze of hidden streets and alleyways beneath Pioneer Square. By 1907, city officials condemned the underground, worried it was turning into this breeding ground for crime and disease, because yes, people still went down there. For years, it sat abandoned and forgotten, until the 60s, when a historian named Bill Speidel turned it into a tourist attraction. Today, you can actually take a guided tour through these eerie, half-lit tunnels and see the old storefronts still standing there frozen in time. And of course, because it's a creepy underground city, there are plenty of ghost stories as well. Los Angeles might be famous for its glitzy Hollywood lights, but beneath the surface, some believe there's something far older and stranger hiding in the dark. In the 1930s, mining engineer George Warren Shufeldt became obsessed with a legend passed down by the Hopi natives, which spoke of this ancient civilization of lizard people. Not the type of reptilian shapeshifters we think of today with conspiratorial stuff. This was a race that were said to have revered the lizard, and these people supposedly built this massive underground city under what is now LA 5,000 years ago. This subterranean city, allegedly designed in the shape of a giant lizard, supposedly stretched from the northeast LA all the way to the Central Library downtown, with secret passageways leading to the ocean, allowing seawater to push fresh air into the chambers. And Shufeldt claimed to have developed a device that he called a radio X-ray, which he used to detect underground tunnels, and maybe even more exciting, if you're a greedy little troll like me, a treasure room beneath Fort Moore Hill. I just hear the word gold and gold. Anyway, he convinced the city to let him drill a 350-foot shaft in 1934, promising that gold artifacts would be found. But before he could reach anything, the dig was abandoned because of cave-in concerns and funding issues. After that, Shufeldt disappeared from the public eye, dying in 1957 without ever proving his claims. But winding things back a little, right before Shufeldt was about to start the dig, a local psychic named Edith Eldon Robinson claimed to have had a vision of, quote, a vast city in mammoth tunnels extending to the seashore. Just a coincidence, or was something really buried beneath Los Angeles, something we were never meant to find? Disney World. Don't it just make you want to smile? It's the most magical place on earth, they say, but what a lot of people don't know is that there's a whole hidden world under the park. Down below, there's this massive network of tunnels called utilidors, and these underground passages let cast members, move around the park without being seen by guests. And think about it, have you ever seen someone dressed as Mickey Mouse casually walking through Tomorrowland on a smoke break? I haven't, because I've never been to Disney World or Land or whatever, but for those of you who have you ever seen that? Probably not, because Disney is all about maintaining the illusion, and these tunnels make sure of that. They also house a bunch of behind-the-scenes operations, from trash collection, costume changes. The tunnels are so big that they're actually considered the first floor of the park, with what we see at ground level actually being the second floor. But is that all there is to it? Of course not. That's not what we do in this channel. We always take things a step further, and with a secret underground system this big, there are always urban legends and rumors. Some say there are hidden rooms used for secretive Disney business, that late at night in those dark tunnels beneath the park, things get a little less family friendly. Buried deep within Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado is one of the most secure underground facilities in the world. Built during the Cold War, this bunker was designed to survive a nuclear attack and keep the US government running. The facility is buried under 2,000 feet of granite, protected by blast doors that weigh 25 tons each. Inside, there are multiple buildings sitting on giant springs designed to absorb shock from explosions. But this place isn't just a bunker, it's an entire underground city. It has its own power plant, water reservoirs, and even a subway system for moving people around. Officially, it was the headquarters of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, but But over the years, rumors started spreading about what else might be going on down there, and some believe it's still in use as a top-secret command center. Others say it's connected to an even deeper underground network that stretches across the country. Whatever the case, if you're looking for a place to ride out the apocalypse, this would be a solid choice.
A cave-in led to bones no one expected to be that large. In 1965, a collapse inside the Lovelock Cave mining area in Nevada exposed a small chamber filled with massive bones. Workers initially believed they had uncovered the remains of cattle or horses that had fallen from the surface, but when archaeologists examined them, they realized the bones were much older and not from any domesticated animal. The remains belonged to giant Pliocene-era animals that once roamed North America. Several of the bones came from a species of ancient camel and a type of giant, short-faced bear. The bear bones were particularly massive and were larger than the bones of modern grizzlies. The chamber had stayed sealed for thousands of years until the collapse exposed it. The bones were remarkably well preserved and showed claw marks on the surrounding stone, suggesting the animals had been trapped inside and died while trying to escape. Miners breaking through a wall uncovered a coffin where no burial should exist. In 1989, workers doing safety checks in an abandoned coal mine in Poland broke through a thin sandstone wall. Behind it was a small carved alcove containing a simple wooden coffin. The coffin was old, but shockingly well preserved given the humidity in the mine. Inside was the body of a man dressed in clothing from the late 1700s. The body was documented by local historians who confirmed the clothing style matched that period, but no one had any record of a burial taking place anywhere near the mine. Even stranger, the alcove appeared to have been carved intentionally and sealed long before the mining tunnels reached that area. The leading theory is that the alcove predates the mine by many decades and may have been a secret burial placed there during a time of conflict or disease outbreak, but no documentation has ever been found. The coffin was removed and the alcove sealed soon after, but the mystery of who buried the man and why they hid him inside a mountain remains unsolved. Explorers opened a side room and froze. Every inch was covered in shoes. In 2012, a group exploring an abandoned copper mine in Michigan found a narrow doorway they had never noticed. When they pushed it open, they discovered a room about 15 feet wide and 20 feet long, and the entire floor was piled with shoes. Some were modern, some were old, worn leather boots, others were tiny children's shoes from the early 1900s. Local historians looked into it and discovered miners used to discard worn-out shoes in underground storage rooms to avoid hauling them back up to the surface. The sheer number, though, was shocking. There were thousands, far more than the mine's recorded workforce at any single point in time. Even stranger, some of the shoes were clearly ceremonial or decorative shoes that had nothing to do with mining. This led to speculation that the room had been used long before the copper operation began. The true explanation has never been agreed upon, and the room has since collapsed, making further investigation impossible. The mine had been sealed for decades, yet fresh footprints were found inside. In 1974, a mine safety crew entered an abandoned iron mine in Minnesota to survey the stability of the tunnels. The mine had been closed since the 1930s, and all main entrances were covered with steel grates that were locked by the state. Once the team descended about 600 feet, one of the inspectors noticed something odd in the dust on the floor. Shoe prints, fresh ones. The pattern was clear and sharp, which meant they had been made within days, not decades. The prints continued down a long passage into an area that had suffered multiple cave-ins. The crew followed them until they reached a section where the tunnel roof had collapsed completely. The prints stopped at the edge of the rubble. The team searched for hours and found no one. No evidence of camping, no tools, no water bottles, nothing. They checked the entrances again on the way out, and all were locked exactly as they had been when they arrived. It started with a hallway carved in the wrong direction. In 2013, a group of explorers entered an abandoned gold mine in Arizona. They had explored this mine before and they knew its layout, but on this visit, one of the explorers spotted something new. A narrow side passage that was not on any of the old survey maps. The walls were different too. They were smooth and cut almost perfectly flat, unlike the rest of the mine, which still had rough tool marks. The men followed the passage about 30 feet until it suddenly stopped at a dead end, but the end of the tunnel was even even stranger. Embedded in the wall were marks that looked like mechanical cuts, almost like a drill had chewed its way forward and then suddenly stopped. There were no signs of explosives, no blast marks, no leftover powder, and the strangest part was the floor, which had odd metallic shavings scattered across it. After the explorers posted their findings online, retired geologists and former miners reached out. None of them had an explanation. The tunnel did not match any known mining equipment in the region, and it was never explained who carved it or why it stopped exactly where it did. Because the passage was not on any official map and no company ever claimed it, it remains one of the strangest undocumented tunnels ever found in an abandoned mine. When an explorer poked the mannequin, the finger sank in. In 1976, two teenagers exploring an old mine shaft near Barstow, California, thought they had stumbled onto a beat-up mannequin. It was slumped against the wall, covered in dust, and completely dried out. But when one of the teens touched the arm, the material was soft, and they discovered it was human. Police later identified the body as that of a man who had vanished in 1971. He had fallen into an isolated shaft, and the dry desert conditions preserved him almost perfectly. The mine was miles away from any major road and had no warning signs at that time. The man had apparently been exploring alone, slipped, and became trapped in a vertical drop. The discovery was so disturbing that the country sealed the entire entrance to prevent others from going inside. Today, people living in the area still talk about the story as one of the most unsettling discoveries ever made in a California mine. A collapsed mine revealed tools thousands of years older than the mine itself. In 1914, workers in a South African gold mine discovered a completely unexpected chamber after a section of rock gave way. Inside were dozens of stone hammers, chisels, and pounding tools. These were not modern miners' tools. They looked primitive and handmade, but they were found in rock layers that were already being mined with dynamite and steel equipment. What shocked the mining company was the age. Geologists who examined the surrounding rock later reported that the layer the tools were found in dated back hundreds of thousands of years. The tools did not match any known culture and looked far older than anything humans were supposed to be making at that time. They were removed, cataloged, and quietly stored away, but photos sometimes still circulate online. The mine workers insisted the tools were found exactly where they appeared. Many scientists dispute the interpretation, but the discovery remains one of the most debated archaeological finds ever uncovered inside of a mine. Explorers thought they were looking at rocks until one moved. In 2005, a group exploring a long-abandoned lead mine in Wales recorded something unusual. They kept seeing pale shapes on the ground. At first, they thought the shapes were bits of ore or limestone, but then the shapes scurried. They had stumbled onto a population of albino cave insects and rodents that had adapted to the pitch-black environment, but they also found something even stranger. Several of the rodents were missing their eyes entirely. Not damaged or injured, just no eyeballs at all. Their skulls were smooth where the eye sockets should have been. Biologists later confirmed this was a known but rare mutation that occurs in animals isolated in complete darkness for many generations. The mine had been sealed for decades, which meant an entire colony had adapted underground without human interference. Even the biologists who studied them said the sight was disturbing. Seeing mammals with no eyes moving confidently through absolute darkness made the explorers rethink what can evolve in abandoned places humans never return to. Inside a mine, explorers found an entire ghost town preserved like a time capsule. The Sterling Mine Complex in Oregon shut down in the 1950s. The entrances collapsed a few times over the decades, but in 1999, a group of experienced mine explorers accessed one of the deeper tunnels and discovered something shocking. Past the first few hundred feet deep inside the mountain, they stepped into a massive open cavern that once served as a staging area for miners. Inside the cavern were dozens of wooden structures. There were lockers, handwritten chalkboards, rusted cooking stoves, old boots still lined up on wooden shelves, and a first aid station with supplies still sitting on the table. Some spots even had newspapers from the 1940s that were still readable. It looked like the entire entire crew simply walked out one day and just never came back. Because the cavern was sealed from sunlight and moisture, everything was like it was frozen in time.
High up in the cliffs of Israel's Judean desert, there's a cave that's earned a grim nickname, the Cave of Horror. On the outside, it doesn't look like much, but inside it's twisting with low passages that open into chambers. Inside, archaeologists found the skeletons of 40 people, men, women, and children who'd been hiding during a revolt around 132 to 136 CE. These were Jewish rebels and their families, researchers said. They were hiding from the Romans, who'd set up camp on the cliffs above. They also found pieces of really old scrolls, including coins and a Greek copy of the Book of the 12. In 2021, new fragments turned up, written in Greek, but with God's name Yahweh in Old Hebrew letters. Some of the text didn't even match the Bible that we know today. In the garden, just a few meters from Leicester Cathedral, archaeologists found something very disturbing. Buried in a narrow vertical shaft were the remains of 123 men, women, and children. The bones date back over 800 years to the early 12th century, and no one knows exactly why so many ended up in that tiny pit. According to Matthew Morris, who worked on the dig, their bones show no signs of violence, which leaves us with two alternative reasons for these deaths: starvation or pestilence. At the moment, the latter is our main working hypothesis. It looks as if successive cartloads of bodies were brought to the shaft and then dropped into it, one load on top of another in a very short space of time. He also estimated that the people in that pit made up about 5% of the town's population at the time. First, the team thought the pit might be connected to the Black Death, but radiocarbon dating places this more than 150 years earlier than that. That was surprising, Morris said. As far as we know, the bubonic plague did not reach our shores until 1348. So what was the cause of the mass deaths that occurred then, end quote. Even though the cause is still a mystery, there are hints about what life was like in Leicester back then. The bodies weren't just thrown into the pit. There was no sign of clothing, but their limbs were still together, which could mean they'd been wrapped in shrouds beforehand. While crews were widening a busy road in eastern England, archaeologists came across a massive stone coffin that had been buried for over 1,000 years. The coffin, weighing about 1,650 pounds, had been sitting along what was once a very important Roman route connecting towns and military outposts. David Harrison from Headland Archaeology said it was a fascinating find, and it's easy to see why. Stone coffins from this period almost never survive intact. Excavating it was tough. Teams of archaeologists and engineers worked for months carefully lifting and documenting the coffin to make sure nothing inside got damaged. The size and craftsmanship seems to show probably belonged to someone pretty important. Back in 2016, archaeologists in France dug into a pit full of severed human arms, hands, and fingers. The site dates back nearly 6,000 years. The discovery of Bergheim is the witness of a very violent event, which took place at a specific time, said Fanny Chanel, an archaeologist at the University of Strasbourg. The pit, called Pit 157, was about 5 feet across and over 6 feet deep. At the bottom, there were severed upper limbs, including hands and arms, some belonging to a teenager. Cut marks on the bones showed these weren't accidents. Someone had used blades or axes. On top of that, the bodies of 7 or more people of all ages were stacked in the pit. One middle-aged man had his arm chopped off and a head wound that probably killed him. And they weren't all from the same time. Over 1,000 years later, so about 5,000 years ago, someone added the body of a woman on top. And there were no signs of trauma to her body, so why was she placed there in such a long time afterward? Back in 2016, archaeologists digging near Athens at this old port called Phaleron came across a mass grave. People had known about some burials there for a while, but the newer digs turned up hundreds more, about 1,500 skeletons in total. Some were in jars, some in open pits. There was even a horse buried down there. One part of the grave was especially unsettling though. Around 80 people were lined up together. 36 of them had iron shackles on their hands. Archaeologists in Cyprus just rediscovered a lost sanctuary dedicated to Apollo, the Greek god of archery. The spot was first discovered way back in 1885, but after digging it up, they buried it again to protect it. Over time, people forgot exactly where it was, and it basically vanished until a German team went searching in 2021 and finally found it again. When they started digging, they realized just how much was hidden down there. They pulled out more than 100 statue bases, beads made of marbled glass, and Egyptian amulets. The craziest discovery was this set of giant limestone feet, proof that giant-sized statues once stood there. What really makes this special is how many different cultures show up in it, though. One statue base has an inscription mentioning the Ptolemies, the Egyptian rulers who controlled Cyprus centuries after the sanctuary was first built. Archaeologists in Rome just dug up a colossal marble head that had been buried for hundreds of years. Turned up during digs in the city center, not far from the ruins of Trajan's Forum, which was one of the biggest public squares of ancient Rome. Rome's mayor even posted about it, calling it a, quote, male face with thick hair and an intense expression, hidden for centuries under the Forum square. Archaeologists found it built right into a medieval wall, used like a random piece of stone to hold the building together. And that's kind of nuts. I mean, something that had been part of this towering statue of a god or emperor had been just recycled as building material. We're still not sure who the head is supposed to be of, though. Could be Emperor Trajan himself, since the facial features do match portraits made of him. But there's another theory. It might be Dionysus, the god of wine, because a similar head was dug up years ago with more godlike details. The spot where it was found used to be lined with giant marble columns and decorated with statues and battle trophies. Finding a piece this size means there's probably still more hidden under there. So in Sicily, they just finished bringing a giant statue back to life after it had been buried in ruins for hundreds of years. It's a colossal figure of Atlas, the titan from Greek mythology, who is punished to hold up the sky on his shoulders. This thing is 8 meters tall, or about 26 feet, and it originally stood at the Temple of Zeus, which was supposed to be the biggest temple the Greeks ever tried to build. That temple was never even finished, though. The story goes back to 1812, when a young British architect named Charles Cockerell was poking around the ruins. He noticed this massive block of sandstone lying in the dirt. At first glance, it looked like just another chunk of the temple, but when he looked closer, he realized it was actually the head of a giant statue. That's when archaeologists pieced together that the temple once had nearly 40 of these atlases lined up around it, each one carved to look like they were straining under the weight of the building. Over time, earthquakes knocked everything down, and later people stole stones from the site to build other towns. What's left was just fragments scattered everywhere. Starting in 2004, researchers collected and cataloged almost 90 pieces, and eventually they decided to reconstruct one atlas. They stacked the blocks on a metal frame, and now, for the first time in over 2,000 years, you can see one of these stone giants standing tall again. Back in the early 80s, construction workers in Jordan were cutting through the ground for a new road when they accidentally came across something that had been hidden for nearly 9,000 years. Archaeologists rushed in and found a massive pit about 8 feet underground, and inside were dozens of eerie plaster figures staring back at them. These things were almost life-size, too. Strangely, some of them had 2 heads. Total, they found 15 full statues and 15 busts buried in 2 separate pits. What's interesting is that these statues weren't even meant to last. The way they were built, the plaster, it should have crumbled, but instead of displaying them, the people who made them seem to have just buried them almost immediately after creating them. As you can see, these are pretty odd sculptures. None of them have any real detail on their bodies. The only part carved with any real detail are the faces. But I mean, imagine digging into the ground and suddenly seeing rows of these blank, flat bodies with huge dark eyes staring at you. In Sardinia, archaeologists just discovered parts of 2 giant statues at Monte Prama, a necropolis full of huge stone figures that date back almost 3,000 years. The newest finds are torsos of boxers with shields carved across their midsections, similar to ones found back in 2014. Getting them out of the ground is tricky, though. Monica Stacchino, the lead archaeologist, said the 2 large and heavy blocks of torsos will need time to be freed from the sediment around them so they can be prepared as is necessary for their safe recovery. The site itself has a wild story. Farmers found the first stone back in 1974, which just kicked off decades of digging. At first, people thought the statues were from Carthaginian times, but it turns out they're way older, made between roughly 850 and 750 BCE. So far, archaeologists have identified around 24 statues, boxers, archers, and warriors, but no one knows exactly why they were made. Were they guarding the necropolis? Were they symbols of the people buried there? Till this day, we can't say for sure. In Egypt, archaeologists found a massive red granite head from one of the biggest statues of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who ruled around 1370 BCE. The statue was originally huge, but only the head and an arm are still around today, both sitting in the British Museum. It's not even clear if the statue was built where it was found, or if it was moved there later from Amenhotep's mortuary temple on the other side of the Nile. Amenhotep III ordered tons of statues during his reign. Some of the others, like the Colossus of Memnon, are still standing today. When scholars first saw the head, they thought it was a statue of Thutmose III, and it actually might have been originally. See, pharaohs would actually sometimes recycle statues of rulers who came before them. They just reshaped them slightly and reinscribed them to make them their own. In this case, the lips were drilled to look smaller, and some heavy lines around the eyes were erased. The head was discovered back in 1817 by Giovanni Battista Belzoni and Henry William Beechey in the temple enclosure of Mut. Moving it was a nightmare. It took 8 days just to drag it a mile down to Luxor to put it on a boat heading to Alexandria and eventually London. At one point, it even stayed in someone's house in Cairo before it made it to the British Museum. I mean, imagine seeing this ancient, massive thing just sitting in someone's living room. Archaeologists in Rome just found a huge marble head buried under an old church. The head was found during digs at the early Christian Basilica of Santo Stefano. It had been hidden under layers of rubble and dirt for centuries. The first thing people noticed were the long locks of hair carved in stone. As they cleared the soil, the full, massive head appeared, way bigger than a normal human head. So the original statue had been enormous. As for what it is, maybe it's a god, maybe a philosopher, but the enormous size definitely seems to point more to the god theory. There's still a lot of mortar stuck to the marble, so they gotta be careful peeling it away to see if there are inscriptions or clues about who it really was. Archaeologists digging at a temple west of Alexandria think they might be getting closer to Cleopatra's tomb, and they've found some wild stuff along the way. The team, led by Dr. Kathleen Martinez, came across a white marble statue of a woman wearing a crown, and Martinez believes it could show the real face of Cleopatra. She's been chasing this tomb for nearly 20 years. Not everyone's convinced that it's her, though. Some have pointed out that the facial features don't exactly match other depictions of Cleopatra and think it might just be another princess. Either way, though, the digs have turned up tons of other artifacts. There's a half-length statue of a king, 337 coins with Cleopatra's face, bronze statues, amulets inscribed with what translates to "Justice of Ra has risen." They also found oil lamps and pottery. The site is the Taposiris Magna Temple, and it sits above a crazy network of tunnels stretching from Lake Merio to the Mediterranean. Martinez thinks Cleopatra's body was moved through these tunnels and secretly buried there with Mark Antony after they both died. She says the tomb has been hiding under the temple for thousands of years. Everyone knows about the giant heads of Easter Island. Turns out most of them aren't just heads, though. They've got bodies buried underground. Archaeologists actually discovered this as early as 1914, but this wasn't widely known until decades and decades later. Joanne Van Tilburg, who runs the Easter Island Statue Project, dug up a bunch of the statues between 2010 and 2014, and for the first time documented the carvings on the bodies. The dirt actually protected the designs from weathering, so the sculptures were surprisingly well preserved. The moai were carved by the Rapa Nui people between 1100 and 1500, usually to honor important ancestors. They could be up to 10 meters tall and weigh around 80 tons. And the island has almost 1,000 of them. Archaeologists digging in Kuwait's Al Subia desert hit something amazing. A tiny clay head with a seriously weird, almost snake-like face. It has a long skull, slanted eyes, a flat nose, no mouth. Looks a lot like the mysterious snake person figures from the Ubaid culture, which lived over 7,000 years ago. This is the first one ever found in the Gulf, though. An archaeologist from the Polish Center of Mediterranean Archaeology thinks the head's long shape might not have just been for style. She says it, quote, might have had a practical use, like holding some kind of wig or headpiece, though it could also be symbolic. So back in 2023, a team from the Inner Mongolia Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology were digging around this old sediment called Pangshengzui in northern China. Ended up breaking through into this network of 4,300 to 4,500-year-old tunnels, 6 separate passages running underneath what used to be the city center. And the really cool part, These tunnels were built for war. It's one of the oldest military tunnel systems ever found. So during the late Neolithic period, somebody decided that they needed secret underground routes to move troops around without being seen. Some of these passages go straight from the middle of the city out to the edges so that warriors could pop up behind enemy lines during an attack. The walls have scorch marks from torches, which means people were down there in pitch darkness, probably terrified, holding fire to see where they were going. And the tunnels are cramped, only about 3 feet high in some spots. You'd have to crouch or just crawl through them, probably with a weapon in one hand and your torch in the other. And you know what's waiting for you at the other end of the tunnel? A battle. Alright, so you've probably heard of Derinkuyu, the famous underground city in Turkey that could fit 20,000 people. We've talked about it on the channel before, but about 10 years ago, archaeologists also found what might be another one beneath the modern town of Nevşehir in central Turkey. And it could be just as big, maybe bigger. Construction workers were just doing regular work when the ground literally caved in and exposed these carved tunnels going way down into the volcanic rock. Once archaeologists started exploring, they realized this wasn't some small cellar, it was an entire underground settlement. Living quarters, staircases, storage rooms, ventilation shafts, all of it carved out and hidden under the modern city streets. They think it's thousands of years old. It was probably used as a refuge when invaders came through, and most of it is still sealed. The deeper levels haven't been mapped out yet. And there are stories about tunnels that go on for miles connecting to even older sections that nobody's found. But if Derinkuyu held 20,000 people, and this place is comparable, we could be talking about an entire civilization that basically lived underground. Deep in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, cave divers were exploring flooded passages when they found an ancient mine from about 11,000 years ago. It's submerged now, and divers had to squeeze through these impossibly tight, pitch-black underwater tunnels to get to the main chamber. Inside, they found stone tools, piles of red ochre pigment that people were mining, and these makeshift fire pits workers would have used to light up their workspace. I mean, try to picture what this looked like before the water came in. Miners working miles underground in near total darkness, using flickering fires to see the rock walls they're chipping pigment from. This is thousands of years before the pyramids existed. National Geographic divers who've been down there say it's like entering another planet. There are still footprints in the sediment, actual footprints from the last people who were down there before rising sea levels from the end of the Ice Age flooded the whole place. Everything inside has been perfectly preserved since that day. The mine just got sealed underwater and stayed that way for about 11,000 years. A gigantic ancient serpent was discovered in a mine, and no, I'm not making that up. Cerrejón is a huge coal mine in northern Colombia, actually one of the biggest in the world, bigger than Washington, D.C. Besides coal, it's also an incredible fossil site. So about 58 million years ago, this place was a swampy jungle, way hotter and wetter than today. There were giant turtles, huge crocodile-like creatures, and lungfish that grew up to 7 feet long. And then there was Titanoboa, a snake over 40 feet long and more than a ton heavy. Paleontologist Jonathan Block said about finding its bones, "It's like somebody handed me a mouse skull the size of a rhinoceros and told me that's a mouse." They found over 100 vertebrae from at least 28 of these snakes. Then they found a skull, which gave the researchers a better look at what it ate. In 2016, a team of geoscientists from the University of Toronto found water that's around 2 billion years old, deep inside a mine in Timmins, Ontario. Oliver Warr, who led the research, said, "We thought, wow, everything about the water is brand new. We're seeing signals in all isotopes that we've identified so far that we've never seen anywhere else." End quote. The team first found billion-year-old water at 2.4 kilometers underground in an active copper, zinc, and silver mine back in 2013. But then they went even deeper, and what they found was even more unique. Warr explained how they figured out the water's age by measuring gases like helium, argon, neon, krypton, and xenon trapped inside the water. If water has been down there for up to 2 billion years, it can tell us something about the atmosphere at the time or the state of the Earth, which previously we've not been able to get much insight into, he said. This ancient water is super salty, up to 8 times saltier than seawater. Warr also joked it won't kill you if you drink it, but it would taste absolutely disgusting, but the salty water might still support life. More than 6,000 years ago, two sisters lived and worked in a harsh mining community in what's now the Czech Republic, and their remains were discovered. The women were found buried in a prehistoric mine in South Moravia, one laid on top of the other, deep in a vertical shaft. The remains were first discovered over 15 years ago, around 2008. But the story's been talked about again recently because researchers published detailed reconstructions of their faces in June of last year. They were buried in the shaft probably because they had worked there, explained Martin Olivia, an archaeologist with the Moravian Museum. Olivia also said it's possible they were, quote, sacrificed or put down when they could no longer work. One sister had a broken forearm that never properly healed, but there was evidence that she was forced to keep working anyway. The burial gets even weirder though. Alongside the women, archaeologists found a newborn baby placed on the older sister's chest, but genetic testing confirmed that it didn't actually belong to her. Even stranger, a dog skull was found near the top sister's head, and the rest of its bones were near the lower skeleton. Moaning Cave in Calaveras County, California has always had a weird reputation. When gold miners found it back in 1851, they tried tossing torches in to see how deep it went, and they couldn't even see the bottom. Not long after, California's first state geologist Dr. John Tresk explored the cave and found human bones scattered inside. He didn't go full conspiracy theorist, but he admitted the scene was pretty bizarre. Things only got creepier. In 1853, a group of French explorers went down 300 feet, and they claimed they saw around 300 petrified bodies, some half embedded in stalactites. They even said the skulls looked like they belonged to a distinct unknown race, and they brought a few back to San Francisco to show off. The theory is that people either fell or were thrown into this cave since there's no horizontal entrance. Excavations have pulled out bones from at least 11 people. In some spots, human bones were sealed under thick layers of mineral buildup, meaning people kept falling in over thousands of years. One especially creepy find were two skeletons that seemed to survive the fall and crawled deeper into the cave before finally dying. Today, the cave is known for the eerie moaning sound it makes as the air moves through the tunnels. Some say the cave is haunted, and all things considered, that wouldn't be too surprising. In 1719, miners in Sweden's Falun mine made a surprising discovery. Deep in a water-filled abandoned tunnel, they found a dead body, a very well-preserved body. There was virtually no decay on the clothes, hands, or face, even though this person had been missing for 42 years. The man was later identified by his former fiancée Margaret Alsdotter as Fetmats Israelson, a miner who disappeared back in 1677. When the body was brought up, it dried out and became hard as wood, or as some described it, it turned into stone, which is why he got the nickname the Petrified Miner. But Fetmats wasn't actually petrified. The body was coated with vitriol, which we now call copper sulfate, which acted like a preservative. Once the vitriol evaporated, the body would start to decay, and that turned out to be true. Fetmat's body was displayed for 30 years before finally being buried in 1749, but the story didn't end there. In the 1860s, during church renovations, his remains were found again and put back on display until 1930, when he was finally given a proper burial in the churchyard. Now, you may see images of what looks like Fetmats on display online, but it's actually just a replica. The Gwenya mine in southern Africa isn't just old, it's the oldest known mine on Earth, dating back about 43,000 years. That's long before cities, farming, or even writing existed, that we know of anyway. But hunter-gatherers were already carving into the earth here to extract hematite, which is this reddish, iron-rich rock. They weren't using it to build tools or weapons though. What they were after was the ochre, which they crushed into powder and used for body paint and rock art. Scientists think they used basic stone tools to dig out the red ore, just chipping away at the rock by hand. In the 70s, researchers found old digging tools made from bone and horn, along with signs of smelting that go back at least 2,000 years, but the original ochre mining is way older, thousands of years before Egypt or Mesopotamia even existed. I mean, people were mining here when mammoths were still around. That's pretty crazy. So in eastern Afghanistan, there's this massive copper deposit called Mes Aynak. It looks like any other rocky hill at first, but underneath, turns out it's hiding one of the oldest known copper mines in the world, dating back over 5,000 years. Archaeologists also found the ruins of a huge Buddhist city built right over the ancient mine. temples, monasteries, hundreds of Buddha statues, and detailed murals. People were meditating above the smelting furnaces. So the mix of religion and industry at the same site, it's super rare. Usually those two things are miles apart, but here, mining and spirituality were happening side by side. The city was around for hundreds of years, but of course, eventually it got buried and forgotten. In 2024, archaeologists digging through an ancient gold mine in Egypt found 2 sets of iron ankle shackles. They were buried inside a storage building at a site called Goza, a mine that was active between 250 and 200 BCE. According to one archaeologist, they're some of the oldest shackles ever found in the Mediterranean. The shackles match up with ancient records that talked about prisoners of war and criminals being forced to work in Egypt's mines. At Goza specifically, researchers had thought maybe the miners were mostly free laborers though, since there weren't the usual signs of heavy security like guard posts or gated dorms. But finding these restraints on site, that obviously completely changes that. There definitely was forced labor happening here, even if it wasn't as intense as some of the other mines. Auditor was a feral dog who lived and somehow survived right next to one of America's most toxic places, the Berkeley Pit, a copper mine in Butte, Montana that's also a Superfund site. A Superfund site, not super fun. A Superfund site. These are places in the US that are so contaminated with toxic waste, chemicals, or pollutants that the government has to step in to clean them up. Auditor was first spotted in 1986, named for how he'd suddenly show up out of nowhere, always avoiding people and wandering the deadly mine grounds mostly on his own. Mine workers fed him, they gave him water, and when he started showing signs of arthritis, they even slipped him aspirin. What's crazy is how long he lived. He lived at least 17 years in a place that should have killed him way faster. Near the end of Auditor's life, environmental engineer Holly Peterson tested his hair and found that it was packed with toxic material. Quote, nearly every element imaginable was present. But arsenic was the real shocker. It was 128 times higher than normal dog hair. In Denmark, a team of researchers was digging through a Viking burial ground. They'd been sitting untouched underground for more than 1,000 years. They were pulling up old bones and corroded tools when they found something that had absolutely no business being there. It was a small glass bottle buried in the dirt. Inside was a handwritten note. Is it a treasure map? An ancient Viking poem? Well, no. It was just a letter from a local guy named Hans, who'd worked on that exact same site back in 1895. He'd buried it on purpose as a little hello to whoever came back to finish the dig one day. It's a strange thing to find. I mean, here are these modern archaeologists surrounded by graves from the Viking Age. They're holding a 130-year-old letter from someone who was standing in the same spot doing the same work over a century before them. The note mentioned details from the original excavation and even named some of the people who were part of it. One of the archaeologists described holding it as a very special feeling, knowing that the person who wrote it was standing right there where he was standing more than 100 years earlier. Another pointed out just how unusual that kind of connection is. Their whole job is dealing with people who've been dead for, 1,000 years, so getting a note from someone who died only just over a century ago, it almost felt recent in comparison. It's a farmer named James Bristol and his neighbor were digging a trench on his property in Lima Township, Michigan. They were putting in a drainage pipe about 8 feet underground when the backhoe hit something solid. They figured it was probably a rock or an old tree root, and they pulled it up. It was a bone, roughly 3 feet long. That clearly didn't come from anything living on the farm. Bristol contacted the University of Michigan Museum of Paleontology, which happened to be about 10 miles away, and a team came out to take a look. Bristol gave them 1 day. He had farming work to get back to, so they moved quickly, and what they found was a partial skeleton of a Jeffersonian mammoth, a massive animal that roamed North America until about 12,000 years ago. Michigan has had around 30 mammoth finds over the years, but this one was especially well preserved. They dug up the whole skull with its gigantic tusks. Incredibly cool find. Old cities have a habit of building right on top of their own history. In places like New York, construction crews doing underground utility work have occasionally broken through to something unexpected. Old iron safes from the 1800s buried several feet down. It typically belonged to banks, jewelers, or other businesses. When the buildings above them were torn down, the safes were often just left behind. They were too heavy to move easily, and at the time, it wasn't worth the trouble, so workers built right over them. Most of the time when these are found and opened, they're empty, unfortunately. Whatever was inside was either cleared out before the building closed or didn't survive being underground for over a century. It's not a dramatic discovery really, but it's a good reminder of how cities work, layer after layer, generation after generation, with like older pieces of the city just sitting underneath everything that came after. Along the Pan-American Highway in northern Chile, there's a stretch of land called Cerro Ballena, which means Whale Hill. In 2010, workers expanding the road started uncovering fossilized whale skeletons. When researchers came in to investigate, they found over 40 whales, along with bones from other creatures, all in the same area. The fossils are between 6 and 9 million years old. What caught scientists' attention was how the skeletons were positioned. A lot of them were lined up in similar directions, which seems to suggest they didn't just drift in randomly. Something happened to a large number of animals at once, repeatedly. Leading theory is toxic algae blooms. These blooms can poison marine life, and if they happened multiple times in the same area, groups of whales could have died and then washed ashore together. If the government ever had to disappear overnight, they'd probably head straight to Mount Weather. This underground city, found in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, is one of the most classified government facilities in America, originally built during the Cold War as a nuclear bunker. It's meant to house top government officials in case of an emergency, and again, this place is a full-on underground metropolis. It has office buildings, a hospital, a fire department, even its own zip code. So if you're not in the government's VIP list though, then you suck, and you'll probably never see it in person. The entire site is heavily guarded too, and whatever happens inside is classified. The conspiracy crowd, of course, has some wild theories about Mount Weather. Could it be where the government keeps files on every American citizen? Is it possible it's connected to a larger network of underground bases, including Area 51? Is this place really just for government officials, or are there secret tunnels leading to underground bunkers for the ultra-rich? I think that's probably the case, especially based on what's going on lately. Whatever the case though, if the world ever goes south, don't expect an invite to this place. Washington, D.C. has no shortage of secrets, but one of the strangest involves an abandoned tunnel system hidden beneath L'Enfant Plaza. Originally part of an old underground trolley system, these tunnels were built in the 1940s, but later abandoned when the city moved to a more modern subway system. Unlike other abandoned tunnels though, these ones are sealed off so tightly that even urban explorers struggle to get in. So what's in there? Well, some think not much, that it's just another forgotten piece of infrastructure, but others think the tunnels may still be operating. Given DC's history of secret bunkers and underground facilities, it wouldn't be too surprising if there's more going on under the surface than we're being told. After all, if you're gonna hide something important, wouldn't an old, sealed-off tunnel system be the perfect place? Back in 1909, the Arizona Gazette published a story about an alleged discovery deep within the Grand Canyon. It was an underground city that looked like something straight out of ancient Mesoamerica. According to the article, explorers found this series of tunnels that were filled with all these mysterious artifacts. There were giant statues and what looked like Egyptian-style hieroglyphics on the walls. The Smithsonian was supposedly involved, but here's where things get a little sketchy. If you ask them today, they'll tell you that they have no record of this ever happening. And while it's easy to chalk this story up as a hoax for that very reason, some people still wonder if the government covered it up, either to protect an important historical find or to hide something even bigger. There are even theories that the Grand Canyon itself may have once been home to an ancient advanced civilization on a bigger scale. You probably don't think of warehouses and data centers as something secretive, but Missouri is home to some of the biggest underground storage facilities in the world. Carved into old limestone mines, these massive underground spaces stretch for miles and are used from everything from cold storage to government records. Places like Subtropolis, yes, that is its actual name, are so large that they have their own roads and even postal addresses. Some of these underground facilities are open for business, but others are more mysterious. Who really knows what's hidden in the deepest sections. One theory is that these underground spaces are connected to secret government bunkers. Sitting beneath the luxurious Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia is one of America's best-kept Cold War secrets. Built in the 1950s, this underground bunker was designed to house Congress in case of nuclear war. It had dormitories, a cafeteria, a medical clinic, and even a TV studio to broadcast emergency messages. For decades, it stayed hidden in plain sight, disguised as part of the resort's conference center, until a journalist exposed it in 1992. And after that, the government decommissioned it, but the bunker is still there. You can even take a tour of it today. And based on some of the images I've looked at, it looks like kind of like the back rooms. But of course, with one Cold War bunker revealed, the question is, where did they move Congress's new emergency hideout? If you've ever been to the Denver International Airport, you know it's got some seriously weird vibes to it. From the creepy murals to the giant demonic horse statue outside, the place feels like it was designed by a secret society, and some say that it was. The strangest theory about the DIA is that there's this massive underground bunker system hidden beneath it. Officially, the airport does have underground tunnels, but some people believe that they're part of a much larger, top secret complex designed to house government officials and elites in the event of a catastrophe. And some say there's alien stuff going on down there too. Some even claim the bunkers connect to other underground facilities across the country. There's no hard proof, obviously, but when you consider how weirdly over budget the airport was, billions of dollars mysteriously vanished during its construction, it definitely makes you wonder if something's being hidden down there. In 1993, miners working in the Dalia salt mine in Iran came across something that genuinely looked like a horror movie prop. A severed salt-encrusted head with a beard, mustache, and a gold earring still in place. It turned out to be the first of a bunch of naturally mummified bodies now known as the Salt Men of Iran. These guys weren't buried or embalmed, they were just unlucky miners who died in the tunnels, most likely during cave-ins, and then they got preserved by the salt. One of the creepiest things, some of them were found with their arms still raised up, like frozen in the exact position they were in right before death, or I guess the moment of death. The most haunting case is probably Saltman number 4, a teenage boy who was caught in the moment of death, crushed by a cave-in. His body is the most well-preserved of all of them. Researchers found not just bones here, but also his organs, even tapeworm eggs, which means he'd eaten raw or undercooked meat shortly before dying. Dr. Lena Ostrom from the University of Zurich said they are rare examples of individuals dating to the ancient Persian periods and are, to date, the only known preserved salt mummies worldwide, end quote. So in total, at least 6 complete mummies, and possibly up to 8, have been discovered so far, some dating back over 10,000 years. So this whole thing started as a pretty standard investigation in late 2025. Police in Northern California were looking into a property over some illegal green growing. Nothing crazy on the surface, just another property they were checking out. But then they found the entrance. It wasn't inside a building or anything obvious like that. It was a tunnel around 100 feet long, running through what was basically a big concrete pipe. You had to go through the whole thing just to get to what was at the other end, and what was at the other end was a bunker. Proper one. It had power, ventilation, drainage, real flooring. Someone actually knew what they were doing when they built this thing. Once investigators got inside, they realized pretty fast this was a much more serious operation than they thought, because the bunker was packed with firearms and thousands of rounds of ammo. Some of the weapons had their serial numbers removed. Others have been reported stolen years before. The guy who owned the property, Michael Kemfold, got arrested, ended up facing a long list of weapons charges. In 2013, some researchers went down into an old abandoned Soviet nuclear bunker in western Poland. The place had been sealed since the early 90s. It was just empty concrete rooms that had been sitting in complete darkness for over 20 years. While they were walking around, they started noticing ants. A few at first, then more. There were so many that it looked like parts of the floor were actually moving. But there was no reason for ants to be there. Nothing grows there. There's nothing to eat. So they started looking around to try and figure out where they were coming from. Eventually, they traced it back to a rusted ventilation pipe up in the ceiling. Above that pipe was a normal ant colony living up top. Over time, the metal had rotted just enough that ants were falling through it and dropping down into the bunker below. And once they were down there, they couldn't get back out. What researchers pieced together is that this wasn't really a colony in any normal sense. There was no queen down there. The ants on the floor were just the ones that had fallen in and gotten stuck. The only reason any of them were still alive was because of what was already covering parts of the ground. Dead ants piled up. The living ones were eating them. This one stayed hidden for decades, sitting right next to some of the most visited beaches in Normandy. In 2006, a guy named Gary Stern bought an old World War II map off a former US soldier. The map pointed to something buried between Omaha and Utah Beach, so he went out to see what was actually there. At some point, he was walking around and he felt concrete under his feet all of a sudden. He pushed through some overgrown bushes and found an entrance that had been completely buried. Once he got inside, it opened up into a full underground complex. Not just one room, tunnels, storage rooms, living spaces, even a small hospital. It was part of something called the Macy Battery, a military position that was built for D-Day. After the invasion, it got abandoned and nature slowly swallowed it up. When people finally explored it decades later, rooms were completely untouched. Equipment was still sitting there. The whole layout was basically frozen in time. One explorer described it as a, quote, strange feeling, a somber, dark experience. But people have been walking those beaches for years, decades, and the whole time, this massive bunker was right underneath their feet. Some forestry workers up in southern Scotland were out cutting down trees when they came across an old iron door set in the ground. That was weird enough that someone called in archaeologists. What they found was a forgotten World War II bunker. It was part of a whole network of secret shelters built in case Britain got invaded during the war. Specifically built for special guerrilla units, guys who were trained to hide, wait, then slip out at night, and cause as much chaos as possible behind enemy lines if an invasion happened. The bunker was around 23 feet long and about 10 feet wide, buried under a couple feet of earth, with a thick iron hatch on top and an escape hatch that had been filled in at some point. When they got inside, it was mostly empty, just a rusted tin can and some bits of what looked like an old wooden bed. Originally, it would have been stocked with bunks, supplies, enough gear to last 2 weeks. Sean and Carrie Tullier bought a house on the island of Guernsey, off the coast of France. They knew that the land had been used by occupying forces during World War II, but nobody thought there might be an actual bunker buried under their driveway. The tip came from someone who used to live there back in March of 2022. Sean said, "From the outside, you could tell it was sitting on top of something. We've been doing up the house anyway, so I hired a digger, and with the help of a mate, we started digging up the driveway to see what was there." After a while, the ground gave way and a doorway appeared. Inside was a really solid underground structure. 2 main rooms, one about 17 by 10 feet, the other 17 by 20. Tiled floors, an escape hatch, and German writing all over the walls. One of the phrases translated to "beware, the enemy is listening." They also found old tins and bits of debris left behind. The couple decided to turn it into a games room and gym, but according to Sean, quote, "It's not just a games room. People come along and ask to see the history. I know it was a bad time for Guernsey during the occupation, but I do find the history fascinating. I think we need to keep it so we remember what happened." In 2015, road workers in Huyan, China were in the middle of a standard job carrying up a street to fix a broken pipe when they hit this layer of hard, round objects. They're about to keep digging when they realized these weren't stones. They were fossilized dinosaur eggs. They ended up finding 43 eggs in that one single spot, and 19 of them were in near perfect condition, somehow surviving the weight of the asphalt and the traffic. Now, this specific part of China is actually known as a hotspot for fossils, but finding fossilized eggs directly under a busy city street, that was completely unexpected. You have to think about the people who drove over that road every single day. Thousands of commuters going to work or heading home were driving their cars back and forth over the remains of a dinosaur nursery. Back in 2011, road workers in Taizhou, China were widening a street when their shovel hit something wooden. They stopped the job immediately, and when the archaeologists arrived, they realized they'd found a coffin from the Ming Dynasty. This woman had been buried roughly 700 years before, but she hadn't decayed the way that you would expect. The coffin was layered, and when they opened the innermost box, there were more than just bones. Her skin was still soft, her clothes were perfectly intact. The secret was this mysterious dark brown liquid that the coffin was filled with. It acted like a natural preservative, sealing her away from the air. A man in the UK was digging a few holes in his garden to put up a new fence when he uncovered a heavy, dark rock that had a really strange texture. He pulled it out, set it aside, didn't really think much of it for a long time time. He actually kept the rock in his garden shed for 16 years. It wasn't until 2013 that he finally decided to show it to a local expert, and the news he got back was incredible. It wasn't a rock at all, it was a vertebrae from a plesiosaur. These were massive, terrifying marine reptiles that hunted in the oceans during the time of the dinosaurs. They had huge heads, short necks, and 4 massive flippers that they used to zip through the water to hunt their prey. The specific bone he found belonged to a creature that would have been longer than a school bus. The fossil had survived millions of years, only to be found by someone trying to fix a fence in his backyard. When construction crews were digging in London to build the new headquarters of a massive financial firm, found something that completely stopped the project. The remains of an ancient Roman temple. It was dedicated to the god Mithras, a figure worshipped by this mysterious cult-like group. It was very popular among Roman soldiers. His temple dated back to around 240 CE, and it's been buried under feet of mud and debris as the city changed over the last 2,000 years. It was preserved so well, they even found a wooden tablet with some of the oldest handwritten documents in London's history. And now you can walk through the ruins. They've been restored and integrated right into the base of the modern office building. So you can walk from a high-tech office lobby where people are like trading stocks on their computers, and then directly into a temple that was built 1800 years ago. Deep inside salt mines across Europe, miners have occasionally come across salt mummies. These are exactly what they sound like, remains of prehistoric people who were perfectly preserved by the salt in the walls of the tunnels. Because salt is so good at absorbing moisture, it pulls the water out of everything it touches. Even if someone died in a salt mine thousands of years ago, they can be pretty well preserved. Granted, they're like a dried out, leathery version of themselves, but they're not just bones. These finds are always startling because the clothing, the hair, their skin, and the tools they were carrying are often still intact. So when modern miners have been fortunate or unfortunate enough, depending on how you look at it, to come across these bodies, they often say they look like a person who's just fallen asleep.